So I am fielding Jezreel, and I'm joined by Melody Hernandez, who is here to talk all about AI. We are both grant writers. I have a focus on federal grant writing. I have a community where I teach people how to write federal grants. Melody, do you want to talk a little bit about your work as well?
Sure, yeah. So I am a grant consultant and grant adjacent consulting, strategic planning, things like that. I'm located in San Francisco and I worked with a lot of small to mid-sized nonprofits, generally focusing on trying to wean folks off of overdependence on government funding, which has been of a lot of interest this year in 2025, as I'm sure that you're aware, Fielding, and others may be as well.
Yeah, so this all started because you and I got on a call together to chat about lots of things, but ended up really spending a lot of time talking about AI, which then led to Melody sharing a blog post with me. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want my viewership to be reading this as well. And I think the conclusion is counter to some of the conclusions I've come to. That being said, there's a lot of valuable information in both the blog you wrote and I think in some of the work that I do around AI. So we thought we would just put together a little video talking about different aspects. And I'm hoping that this is the first of potentially many because I think there are so many aspects to this work. And just so many different ways in which AI is influencing the work that we do, and the potential for super problematic things to happen. So, thank you for agreeing to do this and to chat about this. And we have joked in the past a little bit like, oh my gosh, AI is changing so fast. What if we say something that we don't actually agree with in 6 months or a year, right? And so we're just asking everyone who's viewing this to know that, give us the option and the space to change our viewpoints or change how we are experiencing AI because we do know that this stuff is going to change so fast. Um, so let me give you a little bit of background on like how I'm using AI because I think it's sort of important context. So um, I first started using AI maybe close to 2 years ago at this point, and I was using it like Google, right? It was like, tell me how a city might go about creating an integrated set of walking trail, right? So it's just like stuff I was interested in. And then earlier this year, so just in January of 2025, I started taking a few courses, and quickly realized that with a little bit of information and knowledge about like how to set up projects and actually paying for AI, I was like, oh, I think I can make this speed up a lot of my work processes. And I have been able to do that, but I am concerned about the implications. So this conversation feels super timely for me. So Melody, would you share a little bit about your experience with AI and why you care about this conversation?
Yeah, and I think you were very generous in the how we got to this conversation because I think what happened was I went on a 20-minute rant out of pure anger, and you were like, "Oh, this is actually really interesting. Like maybe it should be a blog post." And so I think one thing I appreciate about you, Fielding, is that I feel like you and I have very shared values, and but we often go in different directions from those values, and because of that we're able to have this amazing discourse that we have because we both ultimately I feel like are trying to make positive change in the communities. We just don't always agree on the where and the how, and then that in thinking through some of the reasoning behind it, I realize I'm making assumptions that I don't know are necessarily true. And that introspection, I think, ultimately helps me clarify a lot of the directions that I'm going in my work, in my professional life, in my personal life, all kinds of things. And I appreciate that. And that's from my point of view of kind of like, let's make this a discussion that other people can hear too, because it does end up having great discourse. But for me, for AI, of course, I've been a reluctant user of it. And one of my biggest hurdles that I'm having a hard time getting over is the environmental impact of it. And just like, I'm not somebody who wants to leave my car running. And if I'm waiting for somebody, I don't like to leave the water running. If I'm brushing my teeth, I don't want to use AI when I could be using Google, because as soon as I found out about the significant environmental impact of the energy consumption, it was concerning. It also, a lot of these, AI companies are located a lot closer to me and are actually starting to wreak havoc on the local infrastructure, the local power grid, right? So, like, these are things that I do think through. Beyond that, I have just found it very frustrating in the same way that I think a lot of folks have, of the idea of like, hey, like, how about AI, does my laundry and then I get to paint? Why is AI making art while I'm doing laundry? I want to make art while AI does my laundry, right? Like that kind of thing. I think the things that we are outsourcing to AI sometimes are the things that maybe are valuable to be doing yourself or are enjoyable to be doing yourself, right? And then ultimately, I just have not been impressed by the final product, right? Like I think obviously understanding that new technologies grow and adapt and change, but just kind of currently where it's at, it seems to me to be creating more problems than it's at all looking to solve. And it does have other implications too. I think I'm just mainly frustrated with the day-to-day usage of it. But I am concerned about, long-term impact of some of the things that we're doing. Some of the concerns that have been on my radar over the years that, folks have brought up, or I've kind of thought myself, is that, there also is a pathway into certain fields like grant writing that is being replaced with AI. So a lot of folks might have started with, writing first drafts and editing. And if we're turning and using AI to do that, then we end up with a bigger divide between the folks who can access jobs, quality jobs, jobs that pay a living wage, and those who can't, because those kind of entry point careers into certain fields are being outsourced to AI. I work out of a co-working space that has a lot of tech folks, including folks that do all kinds of things from coding to security to, all kinds of stuff. And a lot of them have expressed concerns to me that within the tech sector, AI is being used to write code that nobody is vetting for security, and that we are going to start seeing security. Also in the tech field, entry-level positions are being handed over to AI, and those are kind of coupled together. So I think there's outside of the grant world, there's a lot of things that are concerning to me. But I think, I'm happy to kind of keep more of this conversation focused on the grant side of things. For grant work, how I use AI, well, and for my business, I should say, I do sometimes use AI to write things that are a different style of writing than I normally do, right? So please help me write an email. Yes, I say please to AI. Please help me write an email that, gently, tells somebody that that first draft you wrote was horrible, right? Like, something like that. I then, vet it and everything. Or if I'm having like a social, not a so like, still like a work thing, but like more of a social work thing. And I'm not usually writing, like, I don't do events. I'm not an event planner. I'm not usually writing that, hey, everyone, come to Happy Hour Friday type of style of writing. So sometimes I will, ask Chat GPT or one of those kind of ones to give me a first draft, right? And then outside of that, I do have a client that invested heavily in setting up a grant specific folder, I don't know what you call them, account in their paid version of, ChatGPT or whatever one they use. They do prefer that I use that instead of spending more money paying me to sit and write every word. We have a huge bank of content that they put into their, again, paid version where it's all secure and all those things, and say, please use this. And then again, a lot of it is pulling from things I've already written. So the responses they're giving are oftentimes in that tone, which I do, see the value of when you can invest in that, that is something that, that AI is getting better at. And, it definitely does help get those first drafts out a lot quicker. But that even with those experiences, I've seen a lot of things that I think are concerning to me that, we can kind of delve into a little deeper in this conversation too.
I wanted to jump in like six times as you were talking because I think there's so much in what you just said. We could just spend the whole time talking about it. So I share your concern, right, about what is the future of grant writing. And one of those big concerns, so I think like my concerns fall into sort of three categories, right? So one concern is that new grant writers to the field don't actually learn best practices in grant writing. Everything from how do you literally structure an argument, right, to be compelling, to in what order do you do tasks, right? And I think most of us forget who have been doing this a long time that like there are reasons we do things the way we do them, and we learned that along the way. And I think if you take the writing process out of it, we're going to lose something in that sort of grant writer training. So that's one issue. Another issue, and I think maybe you're touching on this, and when you think about like losing those entry level positions, but like, are there certain organizations out there that decide, hey, we don't actually need a grant writer anymore because they don't really understand what grant writers do, which is never just right, right? I think, I don't think I've ever spent more than about 20% of my time actually writing. So much of my time is educating people about what it is I'm going to need from them, why we need it, program planning, budget planning, right? We do all of these pieces of the puzzle, and I think sometimes we're treated as if we sit in a cubicle and write all day, but that is far from reality. And so I do worry about organizations saying, "Oh, ChatGPT, I don't need a grant writer anymore," right? This person with a different title is going to do all the grant writing, only to find out that it's really not that easy, right? Because it's just one tool that does a single part of a multifaceted job, right? So that's the second. And then I think the third is just that we over rely on AI for the wrong tasks,
Yes.
right? So we spend too much time in the free version of ChatGPT saying, write me a grant about solving homelessness in this location. And it's like, well, that, of course, what you're going to get back is garbage, right? And until you really start to learn how these, LLMs work and how to sort of wrangle them into giving you good information, a good output, we are wasting not only time, but as you pointed out, like environmental resources, right? These things are creating strain. Um, so I'm very worried about, what this ends up meaning for our profession, as I think a lot of sectors are right now. Um, so yes, I mean, I think, if there's anything else you want to say about that, I think we're in complete agreement about some
Yeah.
potential real harms to the profession.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because there's certain things that about AI that can and are helpful. So I think you had mentioned to me that you feel like by kind of having invested in using AI the way that you use it, it does free up your time to have more connections with your clients, to have more of those in-depth conversations that you're having because there's less time being spent on rewriting the same response for funder after funder after funder. And some of that points to an industry problem, right?
Sure.
Why are the funders making us rewrite the same paragraphs over and over and over, right? And that's part of it too. And so, I think sometimes AI is helping us solve societal problems that we have that maybe we don't shouldn't be having, right? Like, and that's a bigger question to kind of look at, but I think that's a part of my problem with AI too, is that when you step back and look big picture, all of the resources that are being put into AI in terms of money, in terms of energy, in terms of all of that could be allocated to actually address some of these problems that we're working every day, all day, trying to, get some money to address, right? And so that's the other, like when you say, like, how dystopian is it to say, people use ChatGPT to say how to solve homelessness in my community, right? Like, robot. Please help us. Please help us figure out how to solve homelessness. Why is ChatGPT not like, build some more damn houses, bitch? Like it is logical how we should be solving
Yeah.
homelessness in
Yeah.
a country with enough resources to keep everybody housed. So why are we asking ChatGPT to make these fictitious arguments for us? It's
Yeah.
just that's the frustrating part is that when anytime that you're adding in, kind of this non-human element to the very human work that we're doing, it feels gross to me. It feels gross, and that's something that is probably a little harder for me to get over than even just the environmental part, is the ick on my skin that I feel when I'm using ChatGPT to help me solve societal problems that the tech industry is creating a lot of times in my local community, and that we as humans should have put our resources into solving before we put our resources into these goofy little machines, that
Yeah.
do the types of things that they do.
Yeah, and my only sort of pushback or response to that is I don't think I'm using it personally to solve societal problems. I'm using it to generate required content by an entity that decided, probably arbitrarily, that it needed X, Y, and Z. I have the information, but it's in the wrong format,
Yeah.
right? And so the vast majority of the ways that I use AI free up my time to not spend it on regenerating existing content into a different format or a different set of words, and can get on a call, and instead of spending a lot of time with a client saying, how do you do this, or how do we want to change it for this funder, right? We instead sit there and actually just had a call, I don't know, yesterday, with a client, and we were just sort of spitballing ideas in response to the tornadoes that hit St. Louis City about 2.5 weeks ago, and and I think part of the reason we were able to generate something really innovative is because we weren't focused on a lot of the details that we sometimes have to focus on, right? And so I have found that it is freeing up brain space for me to be more thoughtful and spend more time thinking than I'm spending time weeding through, okay, so what proposal did we last write that thing about? Going back to my template language and copying and pasting or refining, right? And I don't do that work anymore. And I do think it has freed up my time. And I think and this is something, we've talked about in the past too, but there is to some extent, like, not to some extent, to a complete extent, AI is a reflection of the humans that have built it and the societies in which those humans live. And so, are the environmental impacts of AI devastating the same communities that we have disinvested in the past? Yes. Yes. And that's a and that is an issue that we have not figured out or decided we want to solve societally, right? And it's not AI specific in my mind. Like, it is a continuation of patterns that have existed for decades.
Yeah,
um
and that brings us to, I'd kind of had mentioned that one of my five, things that in the blog article that, this kind of stemmed from was the bias, right? And I think, and to me, this is kind of the same thing. So some of these pre-existing biases, some of these pre-existing societal problems, AI is perpetuating and amplifying. I think the amplifying part maybe is a TBD. Like sometimes you don't see that until later, right? You have to have a little more data points to see, did this amplify, right? Feels sometimes like it is, right? And so and interestingly enough, when I had written that into the article, I think that was something that you had pushed back on, was the idea of bias. Because in your words, I think you said, um kind of, is bias always a bad thing? That's what I'm remembering. I'm actually trying to look at the article
Yeah,
right
so
now.
I think I had posed the idea that you could actually create intentional bias, right? So you
Yes.
could take your client's biases, your client's voice, your client's perspective, and actually, create that within your, custom whatever. And train the AI to speak from, let's say, an anti-capitalist or anti-racist lens, right? So anyway, jump back in because I think that was the context.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Your comment was, this seems to imply that bias is bad. I prefer to think about bias as normal. Being aware of our biases can make us intentional, but no one is without bias. And I think, and I agree with that, right? Our biases are, everyone does have bias, right? Um, I think for me, I get concerned that um like I said, sometimes it feels like this is amplifying. And part of the reason why it's amplifying is, if we were able to take the bias of equitable bias, let's say, equitable bias, and put it into AI. But whose biases are being put into AI, right? The folks who are, generally getting impacted negatively or adversely by systemic bias are not the folks that are in a position of power to create the biased AIs, right? So then, because the folks that are creating the AI, algorithms are folks who are of privilege, are more likely to be in certain racial groups, are more likely to have come from certain socioeconomic statuses, are more likely to be in reflective of communities that already have access to places of privilege and power, then we're getting a one-sided amplification of biases that are already affecting communities adversely. And us using it as back-end users, even if I teach folks, how to use it, or you teach, or, people learn how to use it, I learn how to use it better, right? And if folks from communities that are marginalized, minoritized, historically excluded, all these, kind of communities that we oftentimes are working to help uplift, even if they're taught how to use it, they are end users, and they are not putting any of their biases into the algorithm or the system. And I don't think that we've seen all the ways. I don't know that I can even guess all the ways that biases are already being reflected in AI. I mean, we already know that some of the ways that it's affecting AI are not great. And a lot of that is less about the grant world of things and more about, like that anytime AI is being used with any kind of photo recognition things or anything like that's just the most obvious. But I feel like biases rarely ever go in the favor of the folks that I work with and to represent. And I see these biases as continuing to perpetuate systemic biases that are already hurting communities, and widening that, and and I think that I honestly think that that's something that we're going to start to see in the grant world. That the as AI is being used to help score, to help write RFPs, to help score them, and then at the end, I think we're going to start seeing that the folks who get awarded the money, I feel like this is going to be shifting resources to more privileged and more affluent communities, from undoing a lot of the hard work we did over the last 5 years, I feel like, to try to create more equity in the grant world. I think AI is very, very quickly unraveling a lot of the progress we made on that front.
Can you talk a little bit more about where you see that happening? So I don't disagree. Um, and I'm also aware that there are lots of other influences right now that are shifting um, funding priorities, right? And sort of what is um, hot to fund. So certainly it is already happening. Um, and I'm curious why or how AI is I think what I'm trying to ask is that does that feel like a projection? Does that feel like something you think could happen, or are you seeing that already play out?
Well, I think that I see it playing out in certain ways, right? So I haven't seen this is the part of the problem too is not every funder tells you how much AI is being involved in the process,
Sure.
right? There's
We
not
have
a
no idea
yeah,
at
I
scale.
mean,
Yeah.
in my article, like I did mention very specifically this RFP that it did disclose,
Right.
and I feel like sometimes you can tell that it was AI written, right? Part of it I think is that so for example, and I think in making analogies between other ways that we know AI is being used and the biases that we're seeing that I think can also be translated over into potential concerns for the grant world, right? So AI has been used more frequently to review resumes and in deciding who's going to move forward to the next stage of that process.
Sure.
Doesn't get to decide who gets the job, but it does cull that pool down to
Mhm.
fewer people, right? And excludes folks, right? And so what happens is you have affluent folks who have had historically more access to, higher education, to resources, to, places of systems of knowledge and power, right? Those folks learned about this a lot quicker and were able to like have the support network around them of knowledge of how to now make a resume that is going to get you to that next level, right? Whether that's because they're at a college that's teaching them that, whether that's because they know people who work in the tech industry that are telling them this, or they know that people who work in HR, right? And then you have folks that aren't from those communities. They sat there for hours pouring their sweat and heart and soul into this resume. Now, and as a person, you can read these resumes and you can maybe have some humanity in that decision, right? Of you know what, I can read this resume enough to know that this person, maybe they haven't, crafted it, put in the right format that we love to see, but they've got grit, they've got gumption, they've overcome a lot in their life. You're going to read that cover letter, and I'm going to internalize that information as a person and understand, that there's, humanity here, right? And then, maybe or maybe not, right? But part of the problem is when an AI spits out, here's the people that's being recommended to move to the next level,
Yep.
you're less likely to question that decision too,
Right.
right? There's this assumption that humans have that AI isn't biased and isn't
Yeah.
doing all these things. And it's like, well, the factual information is that these people are better. And that's not what it is. It has been trained using certain biases by people who grew up a certain way, who are maybe intentionally, maybe unintentionally skewing points towards people
Mhm.
who have had similar upbringings as them and who are from similar, situations that they are. And so the same thing is likely to already be happening in the grant world and likely to start happening in the grant world, even if it's not, as far as like even, oh, well, we'll just run the LOIs through and we'll get ChatGPT or whatever to recommend us who to move on to the full proposal letter. Then those, once we kind of call it a little bit and get it down to a manageable number, those are the ones where people are going to actually read and score, right? But in the same way that now you have folks who can afford the higher price point consultants, knowing how this is all working and knowing the types of things that you have to put in there in order for it to fool ChatGPT into moving you to that next round, right? And then you have other folks. Like I remember one time I was on a review panel and the program officer informed us, "Hey y'all, I just want you to know this next proposal, I know the person that wrote it, they called to get support a couple times. English is not their first language. And I want us to acknowledge that before we read this, that they did the best they could. This is a arts program for kids that are Cambodian kids, right? And it's the administration is reflective of the community served, and they they do this arts program, but they don't have access to you know, people who English is their first language, who are skilled in grant writing. I want us to acknowledge that before we read and score this, right? And we were able to take that context in. Had that been fed through, and actually, I'm pretty sure that one got awarded. It was a while ago, but I think that one did get awarded. Had that been fed through ChatGPT, there would have been none of that context. right? There would have been none of that provided. It just would have read this broken English thing that was actually explaining a really good program.
Yeah.
It wasn't explaining it in the way that
Yeah.
you want it to be written, though.
So let me ask you this then. If so, first of all, thinking about your analogy with job applications, all I can think is yes, we've proven time and time again that people hire people who look and sound and have the same educational experience backgrounds as themselves. So is AI better than the humans doing the same thing? So I realize there's there's a lot to pull apart there. But again, I think AI is a reflection often of the way that we as humans often approach things. But I love your example of this Cambodian writer, potentially who submits a proposal, right? And I've also sat on review boards where the program officer has said things like, please score the content. We're not scoring their English. We're not scoring how beautiful the prose is, right? We are scoring the program and whether you think they can carry out the program that as it's described. And I wonder if there are opportunities for that nonprofit to use AI to craft what is a more, hits those markers so that when there isn't a program officer who is aware of that, who is ready to say, hey, what matters here is the program and the content, not what you see in words on paper. Like, can we actually remove that from being um, what is required of a program officer so that organization can be more successful across other funding opportunities? And so my question to you is, if AI felt accessible, like paid, solid quality, AI structures felt accessible to disadvantaged communities, does that change the way you think about use?
I mean, I think first of all, I think that's a big if. And also I think part of it, the amplification part is what concerns me, right? Because yes, an individual person can have their biases and go through it, but usually there's only so much one person can accomplish during a workday, right? AI can just spit these out, right? And it's doing it so quickly, it's harder to have a check and balance. Right. So, and having been on like review, like again with the job, thing, and having been on grant review panels, right? When there's multiple people involved, then you have that opportunity for different discourse. You have that opportunity for shared perspectives, and it's very rare to get all the people involved with extremely similar circumstances, right? Like people are going to bring their own unique perspectives to the table, and I think we have done a better job of, as a society, of saying, let's get more diverse people on these grant review panels and things, right? And that's been really helpful. But a lot of AI is built off of similar algorithms written by similar people currently. Can that change? Yes. It also happens so quickly and can spit out so much, so quickly that you're not going to, I mean, who are people running these through two different algorithms? One of them written by, the affluent Yale grad, and the other one by a scrappy, person of color from the inner city. Like, no, like, no, they're generally, again, because there's this human instinct to say, the computer did it, and the computer is this like neutral third party that doesn't need that type of, check and balance, right? So I think, that to me, that's kind of part of it. Um, and I think that, there's a lot of times where uh I think there's a lot of ways that we could actively choose to stop things from going too far in that direction. And historically, we don't always do that. Historically, we let things kind of go a little too far. And then it's like, well, now this is just the way things are, right? So like, I don't see that AI is necessarily going to go all that different, right? Like just even having computers could have been a way that we, address some societal inequities, and then just created a huge digital divide, and that didn't create equity, right? Just, it exacerbated pre-existing inequity. And I feel like we are already seeing that happening with AI. I think we could point to potential ways AI could help fix inequity, potential, and
Yep.
we can also point to ways that it has already exacerbated inequity.
Yes. Yes.
Those are two different things. The potential to
Agreed.
do something and actually doing it are not the same thing. And
Yep.
oftentimes we point to the potential of AI to do positive things while pointing to things that it's actively creating harm, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's kind of usually where I end up with it.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of work by all of us to derail AI from the direction it's heading, to help it be something that we use for positive. And I think there are individual incidents of people using AI in positive ways. But I think the trajectory of where AI is already headed is not great. And I have a lot of concerns about it. And I'm getting a little tired of already of trying to help redirect it as somebody who doesn't even work in that industry and doesn't have a lot of control over the direction that AI heads broad scale. I think what I would like us to do is within this profession is be much more mindful about how we are using AI in this profession.
Yep.
Because at the end of the day, the grant process, when done correctly, helps make for more impactful and stronger programs and organizations. And we can use AI towards that end if we're still focused on the goal of creating positive impact in the community. If we're using AI to help us trick funders into giving us money, or we're using AI to try to do shortcuts to make it look like we planned out shit we didn't plan, when a client tells me, I don't have an answer for that, but here's an AI thing of risk mitigation. Did you actually think about the risks? Did you? I want to know you did. I want to know you, as somebody who's invested your career in this work, sat down and thought, are there risks? Sat down and thought, how should I be evaluating this? And you're not just schlepping an AI written answer and not even barely reading it to see if that even agrees with what you want to be doing. And that's another thing that I have spent a lot of time pointing out to colleagues and folks, with AI generated things like, so AI said that you're going to be giving out surveys. Show me the survey, or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
AI said that you're going to be doing it, by this time, but actually, so AI says that you're going to be doing this right in the middle of the holiday season. Is that really how you want to be doing it? Right? Like, folks are not even really questioning AI. And that brings us, and I know we're kind of running short on time, but that brings us to another point that another one, I didn't even mention this in the article. One of my big frustrations with AI is it is so boring to read that sometimes you just kind of skim it and you're like, close enough, right? And so that's something too that I think as the industry, if you can, and if it's if you're trying to use AI to write first drafts, prepare yourself to sit down and read some very boring work that it's to me it's the uncanny valley of writing. It sounds so close to being good that you're like, that looks good. No, it's not. It's not good. It's not good. AI can pull good writing you've already written. It rarely ever actually writes something that's good. And I think be mindful of that as you're reading those AI written emails that come your way and these AI written blogs and all of this stuff. Are you actually reading that and internalizing the information? Or are your eyes just scanning over it and saying, yeah, I kind of get the gist and it looks good enough? Because those are two different things.
So paying attention to time, I know there's 15 other directions we could take this in, so maybe we'll do another one. But if I were to summarize, I think shared concerns are environmental impacts that continue to impact disinvested communities across the country, with more concentration closer to the West Coast than in the Midwest right now, but we are certainly seeing it happen. Um, we have concerns about new grant writers and sort of the skipped processes and learnings that come from doing it by hand, so to speak. Um, Thinking about measuring this, like what really can AI and should AI be involved in? It is not the leader, it is not the decision maker, right? So, really keeping it as a tool and treating it like a tool and not the leader is really important, right? We need to know what we want out of it. And we need to know when something is garbage. And we need to actually, and thinking about bias too, making sure that we, number one, are aware that it is biased, right? That's the first step. And then making sure that we are aware and that those who are also using AI with us are aware that we need to be just as suspicious of the output as we are of any person, right, who might contribute. So, are there other key takeaways that I'm missing?
Yeah, and I think, just and again, like in the article I said this, just like why? Why am I using it right now? Why am I using it at this point in time? Right? Like, why am I using it for this specific answer? Why am I using it for, for this specific proposal, right? And not just have it be kind of default, default to using it, but being a little more mindful about when and why you're using it and what ultimately it's, I think that can have potential ways to have it be more positive in your life is when you're more mindful about, I'm using it to, are you using it to help you generate ideas, or are you using it to help take your ideas and put them into a readable context or something along those lines? Because, something I ask my clients is a lot is, do you want the robot to tell you how to run your program? Do you want the robot to tell you, like, is it telling you? Or is it helping you find language you've already written, find things that you already want to be doing, right? And those are two different things. So I think being mindful of when and why you're using it is is helpful.
Thank you, Melody. Thanks for having this conversation.
Thank you.